Before we dive in, let me leave you with a truth that echoes across every chapter in human history. Nothing we are began in silence. Every civilization, every story, every ancestor left a trail of wisdom waiting to be rediscovered. What you are about to hear is a part of a legacy, preserved, decoded, and brought back to the forefront. I'm OG Mooney. Welcome to AI Legacy Lab.
When we think of the Middle Passage, we often picture ships crossing the vast, unforgiving Atlantic. But the journey didn't start on the open water. It began long before, on the African coastline, a place fundamentally reshaped by the global demand for human labor. This coastline wasn't just a simple shoreline. It was a highly organized network of fortified structures. A chain of coastal strongholds built by European powers to control and manage the trade in enslaved people. Imagine a series of imposing stone fortresses dotting the coast. Names like Elmina Castle, Cape Coast Castle, Goree Island, and Ouida weren't just random points on a map. They were the nerve centers of this brutal enterprise. And we know the intimate details of what happened there because of the meticulous records they kept. We have the ledgers, the fortress logs, the trade accounts, and even the diplomatic letters that documented every single transaction. These aren't just stories. They're cold, hard facts written in ink. Inside these massive stone structures, people captured from regions far inland were imprisoned. They were held in dark, overcrowded spaces that we now call slave dungeons. This isn't a modern term we've applied retroactively. It's backed by historical surveys, extensive archaeological digs, and even UNESCO documentation. When you visit these sites today, you can see the evidence for yourself. You can touch the iron rings drilled directly into the stone floors where people were chained. You can trace the drainage channels carved into the ground to carry away waste. You can feel the faint breeze coming through the narrow ventilation slits, a chilling reminder of the suffocating conditions described in countless eyewitness accounts. We have testimonies from everyone involved. European traders, African chroniclers, and later, abolitionist writers all described the same horrific scenes. The suffocating air, the overwhelming stench, and the agonizingly long periods of waiting for the ships to arrive. These forts were the true starting point of the Middle Passage. They were controlled, militarized checkpoints where human beings were treated like inventory. Captives were sorted, recorded, branded, and taxed, held in limbo until a ship appeared on the horizon. This wasn't chaos. It was a cold, calculated system. And it's a system that couldn't have existed without the involvement of various groups. European correspondence and African oral histories detail the complex negotiations. The raids, the wars, and the political tensions that fed this monstrous machine. Local African rulers, powerful merchants, and intermediaries all played roles, their actions driven by a complex web of motivations, from political power to economic gain. The entire system was fueled by one single incredibly profitable crop, sugar. The rise of sugar plantations, first on the Atlantic islands and then exploding in Brazil and the Caribbean, created a demand for labor on a scale the world had never seen. Europe couldn't supply the workers, so they turned to Africa. As sugar profits soared, the demand for forced labor skyrocketed, and these coastal forts became absolutely essential for maintaining a steady, reliable supply of people. The entire coastline, for hundreds of miles, was transformed into a massive loading zone. Picture the final moments on African soil. Ships anchored just offshore, their silhouettes dark against the sky. Traders moved captives from the dungeons, through narrow, fortified corridors, down toward the beach. We can still trace these paths today. Archaeological excavations have unearthed the physical remnants of these journeys. Discarded iron shackles, trade beads, broken European ceramics, and the refuse left behind from voyage after voyage. When captives walked toward the water, they were treading pathways that are still visible in historical maps and preserved infrastructure. Their final steps on their home continent were on routes engineered for their extraction. And the ships waiting for them were not ordinary vessels. They were specifically designed and modified for this trade. Surviving ship blueprints and tonnage calculations from British, Dutch, Portuguese, and French archives show us exactly how. The lower decks were pre-fitted with cramped wooden platforms, with the space for each person measured down to the inch by European designers to maximize the human cargo and, therefore, the profit. There was nothing accidental about the layout. It was a marvel of horrific engineering. Once a captive boarded one of these ships, they entered the second and perhaps most infamous stage of the Middle Passage. This stage was defined by extreme confinement, suffocating heat, and the oppressive design of the lower hold. It was a space created not for passengers, but for cargo. This highly structured system, from the inland raids to the coastal forts, from the forced march to the shore to the specially designed ships, set the framework for the brutal months-long crossing that followed. Understanding this beginning is crucial to understanding the true systemic horror of the entire institution. It was a machine, designed and perfected over centuries, with its gears grinding on the very coast of Africa. Step inside the lower deck of a slave ship, a space not just of suffering, but of precise cold calculation. European traders documented everything. Ship logs, surgeon journals, tonnage reports, these weren't just papers. They were blueprints for human misery. They tell us exactly how many people were crammed into each vessel, how they were arranged, how much food they were given, and how many fell sick or died at every stage of the journey. We know these things because they wrote it all down. The hold was a world of its own, narrow, hot, and plunged in darkness. How do we know what it was truly like? Modern historians have painstakingly reconstructed it. They've used surviving ship models, analyzed the wreckage of sunken vessels, and even conducted reenactment measurements. The conclusion is inescapable. The space allotted to each person was brutally, inhumanly small. Imagine lying on rough wooden planks, arranged in rows so tight you can barely move. The only air filters down through small grates in the deck above, creating a heavy, warm atmosphere that never lifts day or night. Outside, the ship sliced through the Atlantic, following routes that were as calculated as the hold's interior. These were the trade winds, ancient sea lanes mapped in detail by navigators. Their charts, these guides to the ocean's currents, still exist today, preserved in European maritime archives. They show the predictable path the ships took, turning the vast wild ocean into a conveyor belt for human cargo. For those below, the ocean wasn't a map. It was a constant rhythmic presence. The sound of the waves striking the hull, the groan and creak of the ship's timbers, the constant motion. This external rhythm mixed with the internal sounds of the hold, the soft rustle of movement, the sound of hundreds of people breathing in unison, the quiet murmurs of voices holding on to a thread of hope, a fragment of memory, a shared language in the dark. It was a symphony of survival. But survival was a daily battle, and sickness was a relentless enemy. The surgeon's journals are a chilling testament to this. They describe rampant fevers, dysentery, and respiratory infections, all made worse by the suffocating lack of fresh air. In their own words, these medical officers wrote about the sheer impossibility of managing disease in such confined, unsanitary spaces. The hold became an incubator for illness, a place where a cough could be a death sentence. Meanwhile, just a few feet above, a different world existed. Sailors walked the deck, their boots echoing on the planks. They were busy adjusting sails, steering the massive vessel, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They watched for storms, for pirates, but most of all, they watched for any sign of rebellion from the human cargo locked below. Their daily routines were a stark contrast to the stillness and suffering in the hold. And the storms did come. Official ship logs record them in dispassionate terms: high winds, heavy seas, violent weather. But for those in the lower decks, these were moments of pure terror. The entire world would shake and tilt violently. Captives had to brace themselves against the wooden planks as the ship was tossed by the waves. Cold seawater dripping through the seams in the deck above, adding to the misery. On calmer days, the routine would shift. Small groups of captives were sometimes brought onto the main deck. The official reason was to let them breathe fresh air, stretch their limbs, or be inspected like livestock. We know this happened from the written testimony of both sailors and survivors. For a few brief moments, they would see the sky, feel the sun, and breathe air that wasn't thick with heat and sickness. But even this small mercy was a double-edged sword, because it was on deck that some saw a different kind of opportunity, an escape. Choosing the unknown of the ocean over the certainty of bondage, many captives jumped overboard. These acts of ultimate defiance are recorded over and over again in ships' logs, sailors' diaries, and abolitionist accounts. The ocean, for them, became the final frontier, a site of both utter despair and profound resistance. It was a choice to reclaim their own destiny, even in death. But resistance wasn't limited to these dramatic acts on deck. Down in the darkness of the hold, it took many forms. It was in the whispered plans shared between neighbors. It was in the subtle acts of cooperation, like sharing a sip of water or a word of comfort. It was in the refusal to eat, a hunger strike against their captors. And sometimes it was in coordinated armed uprisings against the crew. These rebellions weren't just rumors. They are confirmed history. Naval records document dozens of uprisings on slave ships across the centuries. Men and women, bound and weakened, found the strength to fight back with whatever they could find. These acts are powerful proof that the people below deck were never just passive victims. They never accepted the conditions forced upon them. They fought, they resisted. They asserted their humanity in the face of a system designed to strip it away. The Middle Passage was more than just a journey across an ocean. It was a crucible, a terrifying test of endurance, identity, and sheer will. It was shaped by a meticulously documented system of oppression, and it is through those very documents, the logs, the journals, the charts, that we can bear witness to it today. The details, preserved in archives, don't just tell a story of victimization. They reveal a story of incredible human resilience. As the ship drew closer, the air itself began to change. For weeks, even months, the only scent had been salt, sweat, and despair. But now, carried on the breeze, came the fragrance of land, the smell of soil, tropical flowers, and the distant smoke from settlements along the coast of the Americas. This scent signaled the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. A nervous energy rippled through the crew. Their behavior shifted from the grim routine of the open ocean to the brisk preparations for arrival. They knew the drill. Historical documents show that docking procedures were highly standardized, a chillingly efficient process. Decks were scrubbed clean, not for hygiene, but for presentation. And then, the most crucial step, bringing the human cargo from the darkness below. After an eternity in the suffocating hold, the hatches were thrown open. A blinding, painful light flooded the darkness. One by one, the captives were forced onto the deck, their eyes struggling to adjust. For the first time since leaving the shores of Africa, they saw the full, unobstructed sky. But this was no moment of relief. It was an inspection. They were lined up, examined, and prepared for sail. Port records from hubs of the slave trade places like Jamaica, Brazil, Barbados, and Charleston meticulously document these arrivals. These ledgers, with their neat columns and detached language, list millions of souls over centuries, reduced to mere numbers on a page. The captives were officially recorded, not as people who had survived a horrific journey, but as property, as commodities to be bought and sold. Imagine stepping onto that deck, weakened and disoriented, only to be appraised like livestock. Merchant journals and period advertisements, many of which still exist today, offer a sickening glimpse into this reality. Newspapers would announce the arrival of a new shipment of people, describing them by age, gender, and supposed physical attributes, all to attract buyers. Phrases like a prime cargo of healthy Negroes were commonplace, stripping individuals of their names, their histories, and their humanity. The very geography of these port cities was designed to facilitate this brutal commerce. The wharves where they disembarked led directly to auction blocks, holding pens and markets, all structured to efficiently distribute human labor to the plantations and industries built to profit from their forced work. This was the cold, calculated machinery of the slave trade, designed for maximum profit and maximum dehumanization. Yet something powerful and unbreakable survived the crossing. The system was designed to erase identity, to turn people into property, but it failed. These men, women, and children, though physically weakened and traumatized, carried within them entire worlds. They carried memories of their families and homelands. They carried languages, sophisticated agricultural knowledge, and advanced skills in metalworking. They carried their spiritual beliefs, their music, their stories, and their cultural practices. This was an inheritance that could not be stripped away, a treasure hidden in their minds and spirits. Historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists have painstakingly traced these cultural threads, following them from specific regions in Africa into the communities that formed in the Americas. They have found the fingerprints of African cultures on countless aspects of life in the New World. This resilience wasn't just passive memory. It was an active force of creation. The traditions they carry became the seeds of new vibrant cultures. In the face of unimaginable oppression, they forged new identities. African musical traditions blended with European and indigenous influences to create entirely new genres that would eventually conquer the world. Jazz, blues, salsa, reggae. African culinary knowledge, especially concerning crops like rice and okra, fundamentally shaped the cuisine of the American South and the Caribbean. Belief systems evolved into new syncretic religions like Vodou in Haiti, Santeria in Cuba, and Candomblé in Brazil, powerful spiritual frameworks that provided solace, community, and a means of resistance. The Middle Passage was an attempt to erase humanity, but the survival of cultural memory proved that the human spirit is far more resilient than any system of oppression. The evidence of this cultural survival is not buried in obscure academic papers. It is alive and visible all around us today. We see it in the Maroon community settlements founded by escaped Africans in the remote interiors of Jamaica, Suriname, and Colombia, which preserved African political structures and cultural norms for centuries. We hear it in the distinctive language and traditions of the Gullah Geechee people along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, who retain a remarkable connection to their West African roots. We feel it in the rhythmic movements of capoeira, the Brazilian martial art disguised as a dance, developed as a form of self-defense and cultural expression. The expertise in rice cultivation, the complex drumming patterns that communicated messages, the folktales of Anansi the spider that taught lessons of wit and survival, all these are direct legacies of the knowledge carried across the ocean. Understanding this story is not just about understanding the past. It is essential to understanding our world right now. The legacy of the Middle Passage is a core narrative of modern history. It fundamentally shaped the economies, demographics, and cultures of nations across North and South America and the Caribbean. It fueled the Industrial Revolution in Europe, created immense wealth for colonial powers, and laid the foundation for systems of racial inequality that persist to this day. The story is one of unimaginable suffering, but it is equally a story of incredible strength, creativity, and resilience. The descendants of those who endured this brutal journey continue to carry and build upon this legacy. Their identities, their art, their music, and their ongoing fight for justice are a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The echoes of the Middle Passage are all around us, and learning to listen to them is crucial for a complete understanding of global history and the world we all inhabit. If you want to continue exploring these essential truths, to uncover the stories that have been overlooked or intentionally silenced, and to understand the deep currents of history that shape our present, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you in the next video.
Another chapter reclaimed, another piece of history placed back where it belongs. If you have found any meaning in this, let it sit with you. Let it sharpen your vision, not just for the past, but for who we are becoming. I'm OG Mooney, and this is AI Legacy Lab. Honoring truth, protecting legacy, one story at a time. Until next time, stay curious.